This is Whispering Myth, and it's been, of course, forever and a day, because it's always forever and a day before I get back to whispering. But I decided that I was going to try and finish these Danish fairy tales that I had begun reading so long ago. I'm not sure if I'm going to whisper or if I'm going to just read them like this. I have a feeling I'm just going to read them like this for now. So hopefully that will be relaxing in and of itself, but if not, I apologize. And as per the norm, it's just my voice. I don't have a camera, unfortunately, so I can't, be like, hey, this is my spectacular face. Which might be a good thing, because my face isn't especially spectacular. But at any rate, so just getting straight into it. The first one that I'm going to read is called The Treasure. There's once a poor peasant who tilled a small field that belonged to a rich landowner. One day, while he was plowing, his plow struck something so violently that it could not be moved. At first the man thought that it was a stone, but when he looked more carefully, he found that it was a large chest full of old coins. It was gold and silver money that had probably been hidden there many hundred years ago in war times. The peasant filled a bag with the money and dragged it home, for he thought that he had as good a right to keep the money as anyone else. The original owner had, of course, died many generations ago. In spite of that, he feared that the landowner would claim and seize the money when he learned that it had been found in his field. So the peasant said nothing to anybody except his wife about the find, and he begged her to keep silent about it. But she could not keep the secret and had to tell some of her friends about the good fortune. To be sure, she asked each one separately not to tell anybody. But as they could not keep the secret either, at last the news of the discovery of the treasure came to the ears of the landowner. Soon after that he rode out to the peasant's cottage, which lay far out on a lonely heath. There was, however, nobody at home except the woman, for her husband had just gone to town to get some money changed. So when the landowner asked the woman about the matter, she told him all that she knew, that her husband had found a chest full of money out in the field, that he was not at home now, and that she did not know where he had put the money. The owner then said that he would return another time and make further inquiry about the money. When the peasant came home, his wife told him all that had happened. Nevertheless, he did not reproach her. The next day he took his horses and wagon and asked his wife to accompany him to town. There he exchanged all his old money for new coins, and invested the proceeds carefully and to good advantage. Then he bought a bushel of little rolls, which he put into a large bag. The man and his wife ate and drank to their heart's content, and towards evening they started on their homeward journey. It was late in the autumn, and it was raining and blowing hard as they drove home in the dark. But the wine she had drunk had gone to the head of the wife, and she slept soundly on the back seat. After they had gone for some distance, she was awakened by a roll that fell on her head, and immediately after that another one fell into her lap, and as soon as she fell asleep, rolls again began to rain down upon her. These her husband was throwing into the air so that they should fall upon her. "But what is happening?" the woman called to her husband. "It seems to me that it's raining rolls." "Yes," said her husband, "that is just what it is doing. We are having terrible weather." As they were passing the landowner's house, The woman was awakened by the braying of an ass. "What was that?" she exclaimed, feeling very uneasy. "Well, I hardly like to say," replied her husband, "but if I must tell the truth, it was the devil who once loaned our landlord some money, and is now tormenting him because he will not pay the interest. He is thrashing him with a horsewhip." "Hurry up," said the woman. "Get away from here as fast as you can." So the man whipped up his horses, and at last they reached home safe and sound. But when they were home, the husband said, "Listen, wife, I heard some bad news when we were in town. The enemy is in our land, and this night he will be in our neighborhood. So you must crawl into the potato cellar in order to be out of danger, while I shall stay upstairs and protect our property as well as I can." So the peasant's wife went down into the cellar, while her husband took his gun and went outside, and shot and cried out and made a great noise. This he kept up all night, and towards morning he told his wife that she could come up. "Fortunately," he said, "I was able to hold my own. I shot down many of the enemy, who at last were compelled to retire, taking with them their dead and wounded." "Thank God," she said, "that everything has turned out well. I was frightened nearly to death." A few days after that, the landowner rode out and found the peasant standing before his cottage. "Where's the treasure that you found in my field?" he asked him. The man answered that he did not know anything about a treasure. "Oh, nonsense," said the landowner. "It will not do you any good to deny it, for your wife told me all about it herself." "It's quite possible," said the man, "for my wife is something a little queer, and one cannot always believe all that she says." And he touched his forehead as he spoke. The landowner called the woman and asked whether it were not true that she had confessed to him that her husband had found a chest full of money in the field. "Certainly," she said. "I was with him in town when he exchanged the old money for new coins." "When was that?" asked the landlord. "Why, that was the time we had the frightful storm when it rained bread rolls." "Nonsense, when was that?" "It was on the day of the great battle that was fought on our field after the enemy had invaded our country." "What battle and what enemy?" said the landlord. "I think that the woman is crazy, but tell me at once, when was it that you were in town to exchange the money?" Then the woman wept, and much as she disliked to do so, she had to say it. It was the same evening that the devil was tormenting you and beating you because you would not pay him what you owed him. "What are you saying?" screamed the landlord in rage. "I'll thrash you for your lying nonsense." And with that he gave her a blow with his whip and dashed out of the door and rode away, never again asking about the treasure. The peasant, however, bought a large farm in another part of the country and lived there happily with his wife. I do have to admit that I like that story, although it's unfortunate that he made such a foolish display of his wife. It's also unfortunate the guy whipped her for it. But anyway, yeah, that's the treasure. That's kind of funny. Okay, I'm gonna stop, and then I'll start the next one. Okay, so the next one is called "The Old Man Who Had a Large Family." And I believe I've commented on how beautiful these pictures are in the past. I really wish that I could find a copy of these online. In the past ones, I've tried to look for these pictures so that I could include them, and I've just never been quite successful finding copies. But if you ever get the opportunity to get your hands on Svend Grundtvig, I guess Grundtvigs, I should say, because it's possessive, Danish fairy tales, which is illustrated by Struve Van Housen. That's Heusen. Do so. For one, because obviously, if you've been listening, the stories are awesome. And not only that, but the pictures, they're just wonderful. Anyway, all of that said, I wasn't reading anything out of the old man who had a large family, so how about I get to actually doing my job, right? There was once a very old man who had 427 sons. Wow. When they were grown, they went to their father and said that they wanted to get married, and asked him how they should go about it. "Let me attend to the matter," he said. "I understand such things better than you do, and will find a wife for each one. Saddle my old horse, and I will ride forth to woo for you." What? But the old man had to ride far before he discovered a man who had 427 daughters, all unmarried. At last, however, he found such a man, and stopped at his house, and told him that he had come to ask the young women to marry his sons. At last they came to an understanding, and agreed that the young people should live with the father of the sons, while the other man was to bear the expenses of the wedding and of the young women's outfit. When the business was concluded, the old man asked the servant to saddle and lead out his horse. "Has he been fed?" he asked. "I have a long journey before me, and do not want to stop on the way to feed him." "Yes," replied the servant, "I think that he has had enough to eat, for I have given him 7 bales of hay." "Has he had anything to drink?" "No, I did not have time to give him anything." "Never mind. I shall pass some pond or lake, and it will not take long to water him." The old man rode away, and soon came to a lake. The horse walked into it and began to drink, and before long he had drained it because he was very thirsty. On the bottom there were many fishes left, and a multitude of birds flew down and carried them away. As the old man sat on his horse and looked up to see where the birds were carrying their booty, something fell into his eye. He tried to get it out, but was not successful. So there was nothing for him to do but to ride home as fast as he could, holding his hand before his eye, which pained him very much. As soon as the father got home, he told his sons that he had been lucky enough to get a bride for each one of them, but that he had been so unfortunate as to have something fall into his eye, which they would have to help him remove. They searched and searched, but could find nothing. At last, the eldest son, who was very clever, said, "We will put our boats into your eye and sail around until we find the thing." That they did, and for 7 days they sailed about until at last they found the thing that they were looking for. It turned out to be a large fishbone that a bird had dropped, so they pulled it out and took away their boats, and the old man was comfortable once more. Then the men had to find a carpenter who would make them 427 bedsteads for the 427 couples. And the fishbone was so large that the carpenter was able to make posts for the 427 beds. When they were all ready, the old man one day thought that he would like to lie down and take a nap on one of the beds, so he put on his red nightcap and stretched himself out. When he was nearly asleep, a fox sneaked in and began to gnaw at one of the bedposts, and it seemed to him that it tasted of birds and fish. That, however, made the old man angry. He took off his red cap and threw it at the fox, which was so frightened that it jumped up and hid itself in the man's beard. The old man tried to seize the fox as it slipped into his beard, but could not catch it, and later on it was quite impossible to find the animal. Then he called his sons to help him find the fox. The oldest son now suggested that each son take his scythe and cut off some of the beard. So for 7 days the 427 sons mowed until they found the fox in its hiding place, where it had installed itself very comfortably and had given birth to the 7 young ones. At last everything was arranged in a satisfactory manner, and the 427 sons and their father went to the home of the father of the 427 young women, and a great wedding was celebrated, which lasted 427 days. That's the whole story. That's a really tall tale. 427 sons. Wow. What I love the most is right at the beginning when the father says, "Let me attend to the matter. I understand such things better than you do, and will find a wife for each one of you." It's like, yeah, I guess you do understand the matter if you have that many sons. My lord. Wow. And I'm sorry, I'm kind of critiquing it just because I found the story sort of, you know how there are those fables that have aspects to them that are, there's just close enough to life that they're easy for you to swallow. But then there are other ones that you really have to get outside of your normal spectrum of reality and just embrace what the story's saying. This is one of those where you have to embrace what the story's saying and not necessarily apply typical reasoning of reality. Because, I mean, sailing around an eye, I bet that was really painful for him. Anyway, so, excuse me, that was the old man who had a large family. The old large man who had a large family. I'm going to take a look at this next one. It's called Hans and Gretchen. See how long it is. Okay, it's kind of short as well. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and after I finish reading it, I'll do what I did before and kind of stop. I like to stop that way. If something interrupts the reading, it doesn't, I can, hopefully don't lose entire stories in the process. So, okay. Hans and Gretchen, not to be confused with Hansel and Gretel. Some distance from a little village stood a small cottage in which lived a man and his wife and their only daughter, whose name was Gretchen. The people were poor and honest, and Gretchen was good and industrious and very pretty. Near the village was many a large and fertile farm, but the finest and richest was the one that Hans was to inherit. His father had died long ago, and the farm was managed by his mother, who was faithfully assisted by her son. He had to wait until he was 20 years old, and the whole estate would be turned over to him. Hans was not only the richest, but also the best and the handsomest young man in the village, so that it was no wonder that the maidens thought much of him, and Gretchen also, like all the rest. Early one morning, Hans came to the kitchen when Gretchen happened to be alone and said to her, "Listen, Gretchen, you are a pretty good girl, and I should like to marry you some day. If you can remain silent and not say a word to anybody about it." "I thank you," said Gretchen, "but you should not say such a thing to anyone." Hans went away, and Gretchen remembered that she had to bake some bread for breakfast, so she took some flour and ashes and began to mix them. Just then her mother entered, and seeing what her daughter was doing, exclaimed in astonishment, "Why, Gretchen, what are you doing?" "Oh, mother," she cried, "I am so happy." "What are you so happy about?" asked the mother. "Hans has just been here," said Gretchen, "and asked me to be his wife if I could be silent and not tell anybody about it." "He ought really not to speak that way to anyone," said the mother, and threw away the dough. Now, the father came out to see why he had to wait so long for his breakfast, and the women told him the reason for their happiness. Then he went out and harnessed the horses to the wrong end of the wagon and drove away. Soon he met Hans, who asked him what was the matter. "Oh, I am so happy," said the man. "Why are you so happy?" asked Hans. "Because you said that you wanted to marry my daughter," replied the man. "Yes, I said that, if she could keep quiet about it, but she evidently cannot," and Hans went angrily on his way. Many days passed without their seeing Hans. At last they learned that he had been wooing the daughter of a rich peasant, and that the banns were to be published on the following Sunday. They were published in the first time and the second time, but before they were to be published for the third and last time, Gretchen said to her mother, "I must go to church today in order to see my beloved once more at communion." When they had received the communion and were going back to their places, Gretchen whispered to Hans as he passed him, "I have not yet lost faith in you." His betrothed, who was, of course, in church that morning, asked Hans who the girl was that whispered to him as she went by. "Oh, that was a girl that I once thought of marrying if she had been able to keep a secret." "Such a thing never happened to me," said his betrothed. "Could she not remain silent? Why, I've had 7 different suitors and have never said a word about it to anybody. Oh, goodness, except this time when it slipped out unawares." When Hans heard this, he jumped up and ran away, and she never saw him again. He married Gretchen after all, and they lived happily together for many years. Interesting. I'm curious about a word. The word bands. I have never seen that word, and I may be mispronouncing it. Or perhaps I've seen it and I just don't recall it. Hopefully y'all can't hear I don't know, people like all kinds of sounds, so maybe it doesn't matter if y'all can hear anything other than my voice. Hopefully whatever you hear, it's sonorous and pleasing to the ear. Bands. Ooh, that was loud. Bands. Noun, ecclesiastical. Notice of an intended marriage given 3 times in the parish church of each of the betrothed. Any public announcement of a proposed marriage, either verbal or written, and made in a church or by church officials. Wow, interesting. Well, speaking of church, our next one will be a story which is titled Miracle. However, I'm going to go ahead and pause real quick so that I can make sure everything did take well for this particular segment, and also keep any other segments from being spoiled by unexpected entrances or calls or whatever. Okay, I'll be right back.